It was a night like any other in a quiet town, but for Michael Politte, everything would change in an instant. The screams in the darkness, the smell of smoke filling the air. This was no ordinary night. Inside the trailer where Michael and his family lived, a brutal crime was unfolding. Rita Politte, a mother of three, would be found lifeless, her body bearing the marks of a violent struggle. Michael was the first to call for help, but soon after, his actions and his words would come under intense scrutiny. As investigators pieced together the details of that fateful night, doubts began to surface. Was Michael, the troubled teen with a history of arguments with his mother, the one responsible for this horrifying act? Or was he, as he claimed, the innocent victim of a tragic and misguided accusation? What happened that night, and what followed in the days, months, and years after, would spark a legal battle that still reverberates today. But was the truth ever truly uncovered? Or has an innocent teenager been wrongfully condemned? Join us as we explore the mystery surrounding Rita Politte's death, the twists in the investigation, and the fight for justice that continues to this day. Michael Politte, born on November 3, 1984, grew up in the quiet rural town of Hopewell, Missouri, about 70 miles southwest of St. Louis. Known to everyone as Bernie, a nickname derived from his middle name Bernard, he was the youngest in the family. His parents, Rita and Edward, had two older daughters, Crystal and Melanie, with whom Bernie shared a strong bond. Hopewell was the kind of town where life moved at a slow pace. Residents left doors and windows unlocked, children rode bikes freely, and evenings were spent playing outdoors without a worry. Rita and Edward married young, starting their family as teenagers. However, their marriage faced challenges early on, marked by frequent arguments that escalated over time into domestic violence. Both parents were involved, and the children were often witnesses to these painful scenes. Bernie had a special connection with his mother, Rita, who supported him passionately in his childhood. She attended all his school events, recording his achievements in baseball and football with her video camera. Despite the love and care, the constant discord at home took a toll on Bernie. As he grew older, the once cheerful boy became withdrawn and troubled. By adolescence, he was struggling with anger issues, skipping school, and even failing 7th grade multiple times. The tension at home reached a breaking point in 1997 when a violent altercation occurred between Rita and Edward. During a late-night argument, Edward assaulted Rita, and Bernie, just 13 at the time, witnessed the horrifying event. By early 1998, the strain in the family had deeply affected Bernie, leading to a heated argument with his mother. In a fit of rage, he threatened both her life and his own. This intense confrontation resulted in Bernie being hospitalized. After this incident, something shifted for Rita. Realizing the impact of their toxic marriage on her children, she filed for divorce in the summer of 1998 after over 2 decades of marriage. The divorce was contentious, but Rita managed to secure the family trailer and a portion of Edward's pension as child support. Bernie's relationship with his mother began to heal, and they grew close once more, even as he navigated the complexities of splitting time between his parents due to joint custody. On December 4, 1998, Rita, then 40, had just finalized her divorce 4 days earlier. That evening, she worked a shift at a local bar and stayed out briefly to celebrate with friends. Meanwhile, Bernie, now 14, decided to ride his bike to the general store to pass the time. Along the way, he ran into his friend, 15-year-old Josh, and invited him over for a sleepover, a common occurrence in their small community. The boys spent the evening playing chess and video games at the Politte family trailer. Later, they wandered to the nearby railroad tracks to light a bonfire, a typical pastime for kids in the area. Rita returned home around 11 p.m., bringing sandwiches for the boys. She wished her son good night and asked him not to stay up too late. Despite her suggestion, Bernie and Josh weren't ready for sleep just yet. They decided to extend their evening with some music and a little marijuana, enjoying their carefree time together. When they finally decided to call it a night, Michael climbed into his bed while Josh set up a makeshift bed on the floor. Though they tried to sleep, they ended up whispering and laughing about random things, careful not to wake Rita. The next morning, around 6:30 a.m., they were jolted awake by an overwhelming, acrid smell. Michael noticed the room was filled with a hazy white smoke, similar to what you might see when something burned on a stove. Curious and concerned, he got up to investigate. But when he opened the bedroom door, he was met with a dense wall of smoke. Panicked, he called out for his mom, but there was no response. Realizing something was seriously wrong, Michael bolted outside, grabbed the garden hose, and ran back in. Seeing Rita's car in the driveway, he knew she was still home. His first instinct was to rush to her bedroom. But instead of finding her unconscious from the smoke, he was confronted with a horrifying sight. His mother's body was on fire, her upper torso engulfed in flames, and blood streaked down her legs. Frozen with shock, Michael fell to his knees, unsure of what to do. Desperately, he tried to extinguish the flames, but the hose didn't reach her room. The smell of burning flesh and the sound of the crackling fire burned into Michael's memory, haunting him long after that terrible morning. Meanwhile, Josh ran out to get help, and neighbors, hearing the commotion, called the police and fire department. When first responders arrived, they described the scene as something out of a nightmare. The house reeked of smoke and charred remains. After extinguishing the fire, investigators immediately realized this wasn't just a tragic accident. Rita had suffered brutal injuries inflicted with a blunt object, primarily to her head and upper body. Blood spattered the floor, walls, and furniture, painting a grim picture of a violent struggle. The fire chief confirmed that an accelerant had been used to set her body ablaze, but no other clues were found. No murder weapon, no signs of forced entry, and no forensic evidence pointing to a suspect. Michael, overwhelmed with grief, called his sisters to tell them that someone had broken into their home and killed their mother. Both sisters rushed to the scene and found their brother sitting in a police car, his face smeared with soot and tears. His grief was palpable but expressed through quiet withdrawal rather than hysterics. Despite Michael's trauma, both he and Josh were taken to the sheriff's office for questioning. They were transported in separate vehicles to prevent them from aligning their stories. Officers observed Michael's behavior closely, noting that he seemed detached. At one point, he asked what would happen to his mom's car, a comment they found odd and suspicious. This remark, combined with his calm demeanor, led some investigators to suspect him of involvement in his mother's death. Michael was subjected to a voice stress test, a controversial tool often dismissed as unreliable in court. When he failed, it only deepened the officer's suspicions. The investigators scrutinized his behavior, deeming it inappropriate for someone who had just found their mother dead and burning. The boy's clothing and shoes were confiscated for analysis. He explained in detail how he and Josh had spent the previous day, riding bikes, playing video games, and later lighting a small fire at the railroad tracks near his house using gasoline. Investigators confirmed this story when they found evidence of a recent fire in the described area. Despite finding no blood or signs of struggle on Michael's clothes or shoes, forensic analysis detected traces of a chemical substance on his shoes, possibly linked to the accelerant used in the fire. This discovery, paired with Michael's turbulent relationship with his mother and his history of aggressive outbursts, cast a dark shadow over him. For days, Michael and Josh were interrogated separately. Each session stretched for hours, but Michael's account remained consistent. Josh corroborated his friend's story, providing no evidence to suggest Michael's involvement in the murder. Yet, the combination of circumstantial evidence, Michael's history of anger, and the lingering scent of suspicion from investigators continued to shape the trajectory of the case. Investigators became convinced that Michael Politte was responsible for his mother's death, basing their belief on the presence of accelerant on his shoes and his perceived lack of emotional response after the tragedy. They theorized that Michael had orchestrated the crime and invited his friend Josh as an alibi. Their relentless questioning eventually yielded a breakthrough. 2 days after the incident, Josh made a statement that significantly weakened Michael's defense. He claimed that during the night, he woke up to noises and screams only to realize that Michael was no longer in the room. This statement was recorded on video and later became pivotal in the case. However, Josh later confided in his mother that he had been subjected to intense interrogation tactics. He admitted he felt confused, unsure of what was real and what wasn't. The police had suggested he might be lying or even implicated him in the crime, leaving the teenager terrified. Despite both boys denying any involvement, Josh's recorded statement was enough for authorities to act. Michael Politte was arrested 2 days after the crime, accused of murdering his mother. Josh's words undermined Michael's claim that he and Josh had been together all night and woke up simultaneously at 6:30 a.m. to the smell of smoke. Michael's family, including his sisters and his father Edward, were shocked by the arrest. While they acknowledged Michael's temper, the idea that the 14-year-old could brutally kill his mother and set her body on fire was inconceivable. His loved ones were convinced a mistake had been made and hoped the truth would eventually come to light. However, Michael remained in custody for 3 years awaiting trial. During this time, prosecutors offered Michael a plea deal: plead guilty to intentional homicide and receive a sentence of no more than 15 years in prison, avoiding a potential life sentence. Michael refused, steadfastly maintaining his innocence. He insisted he could never harm his mother, the person he was closest to in the world. His decision meant the case would go to trial. The trial began in January 2002, with Michael now 17 years old. Represented by a public defender with minimal legal experience, Michael faced a challenging battle. The prosecution built its case around circumstantial evidence, including the accelerant traces found on Michael's shoes. Investigators argued that the accelerant matched both the fire Michael and Josh had lit for fun at the railroad tracks and the one that consumed the Politte family home. A witness also testified that weeks before the tragedy, they had seen Michael on the porch angrily flicking a lighter after an argument with his mother, implying a potential threat. Josh did not testify at the trial, nor was the jury shown the video of his interrogation where he stated Michael wasn't in the room that night. Instead, the jury was informed that Josh had been granted immunity, suggesting he had provided valuable information. This raised questions, but his absence as a witness remained unexplained. The prosecution also brought forward 3 juvenile detention staff members who claimed Michael had confessed to killing his mother. They testified that Michael had shouted during a suicide attempt that he didn't care because he had already taken his mother's life. These accounts were noted in their reports and presented as evidence in court. Michael's defense team argued there was no direct evidence tying him to the crime scene. However, they struggled to counter the prosecution's narrative effectively. The attorney chose not to have Michael testify, citing a lack of preparation time, which left Michael unable to personally refute the claims against him. Ultimately, the prosecution's combination of circumstantial evidence, witness statements, and testimony from the detention center staff proved persuasive. Michael's insistence on his innocence was overshadowed by the allegations and the doubts sown by the prosecution's case. Despite the brutal nature of the crime, there were no physical injuries on Michael Politte's body, nor was there any blood on his clothes. The accelerant found on his shoes was likely a result of the fire he and his friend Josh had set on the railroad tracks for fun, which the prosecution used to cast suspicion on him. Unfortunately, this was the extent of Michael's defense during the trial. His attorney did not call any witnesses to testify on Michael's behalf, not even his sisters, who knew him well and could have spoken to his character. The defense primarily relied on the fact that no murder weapon was found at the scene, and there was no direct physical evidence linking Michael to the crime. There was no blood or injuries on his body despite the clear evidence of a violent struggle between the victim, Rita, and her attacker. The defense also pointed out that no other potential suspects were considered, even though there were individuals who could have had motives. However, investigators and the public focused solely on Michael, a troubled teenager with a history of arguments with his mother. After just 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 4 hours before delivering a guilty verdict. Michael Politte was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He was sent to Missouri State Prison, which was notorious for its violence and brutality, earning the nickname the bloodiest 47 acres in America. Inside, Michael became the target of constant attacks by other inmates. In order to protect himself, he joined a gang, becoming a skinhead. He also turned to illegal substances to cope with the trauma of his conviction and the harsh conditions of prison life. Meanwhile, his father, Edward Politte, tried to help by hiring an attorney to file an appeal. However, after considerable effort and expense, the appeal was ultimately rejected. Edward later claimed that the lawyers he hired were ignoring him and not responding to calls or emails. In a desperate attempt to force action, Edward threatened to file a complaint against them, but it was later revealed that he hadn't actually contacted the attorneys at all. This betrayal devastated Michael, who was already struggling in prison. The rift between father and son became irreparable, and Michael refused to speak to his father again. 5 years after his conviction, Michael reached out to a non-profit organization that worked on cases of wrongful conviction. They agreed to take on his case, and with their support, Michael turned his life around. He stopped using drugs and began focusing on the possibility of proving his innocence. The non-profit organization worked tirelessly to investigate the details of Rita Politte's tragic death, and after 10 years of careful research, a new legal team joined the effort. The new defense team meticulously examined all the evidence and believed that Michael had been convicted simply because he was an easy target, a vulnerable teenager who had no one to defend him. The loss of his mother had marked the beginning of his downward spiral, but now, with a committed legal team behind him, Michael's case was about to take a significant turn. The prosecution's case was based on several key points, including the claim that an accelerant had been used to start the fire. However, the fire chief's testimony was revealed to be based on mere speculation, as no laboratory tests had been conducted to verify the presence of any accelerants. When the lab did test Michael's shoes, they found no trace of accelerant. Instead, the substance found on his shoes was determined to be a chemical used in shoe manufacturing, which had been mistaken for gasoline. The Missouri State Crime Lab agreed with this conclusion, stating that the solvents used in shoe adhesives bore similarities to gasoline, a fact that was not widely known in the late 90s. Additionally, the prosecution relied on testimony from 3 witnesses who claimed to have heard Michael confess to killing his mother. However, Michael insisted that what he actually said was that he didn't care because someone else had taken his mother's life. At the time, Michael was severely stressed and contemplating suicide, and his statement was misunderstood by the witnesses. One of Michael's attorneys later pointed out that, just as we talk about tunnel vision, people can hear what they want to hear. The police had documented a violent struggle, with blood spattered across walls and furniture, but Michael showed no signs of injury. How could a 14-year-old commit such a brutal crime without leaving a trace? It seemed impossible, yet this was the evidence used to convict him. Experts, law enforcement officials, and lawyers now agree that the case against Michael was built on fabricated evidence, with a flawed investigation and an inadequate defense team. His lawyers worked tirelessly to unravel the truth, and eventually the justice system started to shift in his favor. In 2021, a law was passed in Missouri allowing juvenile offenders convicted of serious crimes a chance at parole. Michael, who had served a life sentence, fell under this law. On April 22, 2022, after 24 years behind bars, 38-year-old Michael Politte was released on parole. His sisters, along with other family and friends who had believed in his innocence all along, were there to greet him. Michael, who had spent almost his entire life in prison, was now faced with the daunting task of rebuilding his life. He moved in with one of his sisters, obtained a driver's license, and found work as a carpenter, but his criminal record still marked him as someone who had taken his own mother's life. Michael's primary goal now is to clear his name and seek justice for his mother, Rita. He filed a petition to overturn his conviction and requested a retrial, but the Missouri Supreme Court rejected both. However, hope is not lost. The local sheriff's department announced that they had reopened Rita Politte's case, although no further information about the investigation has been released yet. As part of Michael's legal team's renewed efforts, they presented new court documents naming alternative suspects, one of whom is Michael's father, Edward Politte. Despite having an alibi, Edward had a clear motive. Just days before Rita's death, the divorce proceedings concluded, and Rita was granted financial compensation, including child support and the family trailer. Witnesses recalled that Edward had lost his temper in the courtroom, threatening that Rita wouldn't live to see the money she was awarded. His anger over the financial settlement seemed to have sparked his fury. Although Edward's alibi placed him 86 miles away at the time of the crime, it is possible that he had an accomplice, potentially his cousin, Michael's uncle Johnny. Investigators later discovered that Johnny had been near Rita's trailer at the time of the attack. Several people reported seeing him walking along the railroad tracks through the woods, just as emergency vehicles were approaching. Johnny's suspicious behavior didn't end there. He was seen at neighbors' homes shortly after the attack, asking about the incident as if conducting his own investigation. Johnny's involvement in the case deepened when he brought a crowbar to the police station, claiming to have found it in Michael's closet. The police were skeptical since they had already thoroughly searched Michael's room, but Johnny insisted the crowbar had been hidden deep in the closet. Tests later revealed that the crowbar wasn't the murder weapon, and it appeared Johnny had attempted to frame Michael for the crime. Furthermore, some members of the jury later admitted that they had felt pressured during the trial, leading them to rush to a guilty verdict. The deliberation lasted just 4 hours, and some jurors admitted that they didn't take the time to fully consider the complexities of the case. To them, Michael's life didn't seem worth extended deliberation. Unfortunately, Michael's fate was sealed quickly, without a fair examination of all the evidence. Now, Michael Politte and his legal team are determined to uncover the truth and hold those responsible for his wrongful conviction accountable. With new leads and a fresh perspective, the case that sent a teenager to prison for life is far from over, and justice for Rita Politte may still be within reach. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.